On April 4, 2025, the Chinese government published a short announcement that most Americans never read. It placed 7 metallic elements under strict export controls, effective immediately. 7 metals with names most people cannot pronounce: samarium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, lutetium, scandium, yttrium. Within weeks, car manufacturers in the United States and Europe began shutting down assembly lines. Defense contractors went quiet in ways that defense contractors never go quiet publicly. The price of dysprosium in Europe climbed to 6 times what it cost inside China. And Washington discovered, in real time, that the most powerful military and technological civilization in human history had been built on a foundation of raw materials it had spent decades allowing one country to monopolize. That country had just turned off the tap. To understand the full weight of what China did on April 4, 2025, start with the basics that most people never learned because nobody thought Yang He needed to. There are 17 rare earth elements, the 15 lanthanides on the periodic table plus scandium and yttrium. They are not rare in the sense of being geologically scarce. The name is misleading. They are spread across the Earth's crust in reasonable quantities. What makes them irreplaceable is the extraordinary magnetic, conductive, and luminescent properties they produce when refined and processed into specific technical forms. And what makes them geopolitically catastrophic is that China controls not just the mining but the processing, the separation, the purification, the conversion into usable industrial material. According to the International Energy Agency, for a remarkable 19 out of 20 important strategic minerals, China is the leading refiner, with an average market share of 70%. For rare earth magnets specifically, Chinese state-backed companies now control 89% of global refining and 94% of the world's production of sintered permanent magnets. 2 decades ago, that magnet share was 50%. China did not stumble into this dominance. It was engineered deliberately over 30 years while the rest of the world watched and chose to do nothing. The specific metals that disappeared from global supply chains in April 2025 were not randomly selected. They are the heavy rare earths, the ones most critical to the highest performance applications. Terbium and dysprosium are what give neodymium iron boron magnets their ability to function in extreme heat without losing their magnetic properties. Without them, the motors in electric vehicles, wind turbines, industrial machinery, and the compressors inside the first aid or cooling systems fail or perform so badly they become unusable. Yttrium goes into radar systems, jet engine coatings, and the phosphors inside LED screens. Gadolinium is critical in medical imaging equipment, MR1 machines specifically. Lutetium is used in cancer treatment. Scandium strengthens aluminum alloys used in aerospace. These are not commodity materials that can be substituted with cheaper alternatives. There are no cheaper alternatives. The physics of what these elements do at the molecular level cannot be replicated with anything else at scale. What China did with these controls was not simply restrict exports of raw ore. It was far more surgical than that. The October 2025 escalation, which Beijing labeled Announcement Number 61, was the moment analysts described as Beijing turning the United States' own weapons against it. For decades, Washington had used something called the Foreign Direct Product Rule, a mechanism introduced in 1959 to restrict foreign-made semiconductor products from reaching China if they incorporated American technology. China announced it was applying the same logic to rare earths. Any foreign company, anywhere in the world, that wanted to export products containing Chinese-sourced rare earth materials or manufactured using Chinese rare earth processing technologies now needed explicit approval from Beijing. That is not a trade restriction. That is a global regulatory choke point. A German automaker assembling electric vehicle motors in Stuttgart using Chinese-origin magnets purchased from a South Korean supplier suddenly needed a Chinese export license to move those motors to a customer in Texas. China had planted its regulatory flag inside supply chains it did not physically own, on the other side of the planet. The defense implications are the ones that are discussed only in the quietest corners of Washington policy circles because saying them plainly makes the vulnerability sound too catastrophic to be politically survivable. Rare earth elements are embedded in virtually every advanced weapons system in the American arsenal. The F-35 fighter jet contains approximately 920 pounds of rare earth materials per aircraft. Virginia-class submarines require them in their propulsion systems and sonar. Company. Yang. Columbia-class submarines, the nation's nuclear deterrent, use them in their navigation and targeting systems. Tomahawk cruise missiles, Predator drones, the Joint Direct Attack Munitions Smart Bomb series, radar arrays, all of them depend on high-performance rare earth magnets that, as of December 2025, can no longer be sold to companies with any affiliation to foreign militaries without explicit Chinese government approval. The Center for Strategic and International Studies described the new rules in plain language. Any requests to use rare earths for military purposes will be automatically rejected. Beijing had, in regulatory language, declared that the United States military would need Chinese permission to rearm. The history of how this situation was allowed to develop is one of the most consequential failures of American industrial policy in the post-war era. China first demonstrated its willingness to weaponize rare earth dominance in 2010, when it cut off exports to Japan over a few Yixing trawler dispute in the East China Sea. Japan panicked. The world noticed briefly. And then the world went back to buying from China because Chinese rare earth prices were too cheap, and the political inconvenience of diversifying was too expensive. Between 2023 and 2025, China escalated from that 2010 demonstration into a systematic campaign restricting gallium and germanium exports in 2023, adding antimony and graphite and tungsten in December 2024, then adding the 7 heavy rare earth elements in April 2025, and then expanding to 12 of the 17 rare earth metals by October. Each step was telegraphed. Each step was met with the same American response: urgent statements about domestic supply chain development and legislation that moved too slowly to matter. The actual state of American domestic rare earth capacity in 2025 tells the real story of the gap. The United States has exactly one company manufacturing rare earth permanent magnets domestically: Novian Magnet. EEX. The Department of Defense committed more than $439 million between 2020 and 2025 toward building domestic supply chains. MP Materials, the company operating the Mountain Pass mine in California, received tens of millions in Pentagon contracts and by end of 2025 was producing approximately 1,000 tons of neodymium iron boron magnets annually. China produces 138,000 tons of the same magnet per year. The United States' most ambitious domestic production effort amounts to less than 1% of Chinese output, and building the mine-to-magnet supply chain that the Pentagon's own 2024 National Defense Industrial Strategy set as a 2027 goal requires not just capital but the processing knowledge, the chemical engineering expertise, and the refining infrastructure that China built over 3 decades and is now legally restricting through technology export controls so that nobody can replicate it quickly even if they want. The temporary reprieve that came from the Trump-Xi summit in Busan on October 30, 2025 should not be misread as resolution. China suspended the October expansion controls for 1 year as a confidence-building gesture. But what did not get suspended is the April licensing system that already effectively blocked rare earths from reaching Western defense manufacturers. What did not get suspended is the permanent addition of 7 heavy rare earths to the Duluth control list. What did not get suspended is the prohibition on exporting rare earth extraction and separation technologies that Beijing announced in December 2023. China handed back the decorative parts of its leverage while keeping the structural choke points firmly in place. Here is the prediction that should shock anyone paying attention to where this trajectory leads. China is not wielding rare earth dominance as a temporary bargaining chip. It is using the current period of negotiation as a window to cement the dependence. Why more deeply? Every month that Western manufacturers cannot source rare earths independently, their engineering talent atrophies, their production lines retool around alternative designs that ultimately require fewer rare earths at lower performance specifications, and their willingness to fund the decade-long investment needed for true supply chain independence fades. Beijing understands that leverage is most effective not when it is applied maximally, but when it is applied just enough to keep the dependent party negotiating forever. The suspension creates the illusion of partnership. The licensing system keeps the gun loaded. And the country that woke up in April 2025 to discover that its fighter jets, its submarines, and its electric vehicle industry all ran on materials that had handed a single competitor the power to cut off that country is still, as of today, running on borrowed time and a 1-year truce that expires before the next American administration has found a solution.